Team 17 are one of the UK gaming industry's true success stories, having survived the dramatically changing scene during and past the 1990s. A large part of that resilience was down to one game. A game so addictive in its simplicity that it birthed a long-running series of games that few franchises could even hope to match. Worms. Today we'll hear from some of the people responsible for its development and success, and hear the story of how a simple artillery game conquered the world. I'm on a retro tip, and this is the making of Worms.
What's this?
To take us through the story, we'll hear from Andy Davidson, the creator of Worms. He declined a video interview, so his interview will be voiced by an actor, as well as Team 17 members Martyn Brown, producer on Worms, Chris Blythe, who created the 3D animated cutscenes and intros, and Björn Linner, the game's composer. Zoom audio is unreliable, so as always, subtitles are available should you need them. Back then, the British gaming scene was full of publisher/developer studios that didn't operate with big budgets or huge offices, but sat in small office spaces in dim corners of the country. Rather than having a vast distribution network, they often sold their discs and cassettes in small independent game shops or even in newsagents. 17-bit software fit this description, being based in a tiny office in Wakefield, West Yorkshire. 17-bit software was started by Michael Robinson, who'd been successful with his chain of shops called Microbyte. His simple idea was to find talented young developers, sign their games in the same way that record labels sign bands, and sell those games in his Microbyte shops. One of the first of these young developers to come to their attention was 19-year-old hobbyist Andreas Tadic from Sweden, who was active in the Amiga demo scene and had programmed an Amiga shooter called Half-Bright. He was contacted by Microbyte employee Martyn Brown, and it was suggested that he meet with artist Rico Holmes. The two joined forces and, along with another Swedish programmer Peter Tulleby, called themselves Team 7. Their first game was Miami Chase, published on the Amiga by Codemasters in 1990. Following Miami Chase's favourable reception, Martyn suggested that 17-bit software should not only publish games, but make them too. They already had a team in place, Holmes as the artist, Tadic and Tulleby as programmers, and Martyn himself as project manager. The final piece of the puzzle was to name the new venture, and the names Team 7 and 17-bit software were merged to create Team 17.
I'd got an Amiga, and I was getting right into demo scene and everything else, and I just said to Mick, who ran Microbyte, one day, I said, well, we could probably do something like a collection of sorts, and all the Amiga stuff, it all just sort of aligned, and I got to do quite a bit of Amiga stuff, and I got talking to everybody on demo side, and Rico doing graphics, and Alice doing music, and Andreas doing code. So I mean, it all just came together, really.
The Amiga was the obvious choice for Team 17's games.
Oh well, I mean, it was the only platform that you know that we could do everything on. You know, and we were all insanely emphatic about the Amiga, so there was no other platform wanted it to be on. So we didn't really. I mean, at the time, it was the only comparable platform was ST, but we were interested in that.
You'd have your workbench, but all your other screens were full screen, and you'd pull them down. And I think there was a simplicity in that, like when I'm working on this, I'm working on this. And then when I change, I'm working on that. And I think the way the software and even the whole ecosystem worked made you a better multitasker. Now I feel I'm a worse multitasker. It was at that level that it was approachable to so many other people. And I think we're not at that place nowadays. There's a lot more coders nowadays, but the work that it takes, you have to be far more devoted to become that type of person. And I feel that there was a lot more casual things. There was a lot, even I remember back in the days with Scion, that people say, oh, I made a little program on my Scion pocket computer, you know? It was a lot more approachable to make things and do things. And I don't think we have that in that same way now. And I remember the first Amiga that I got and going through all the demos on those discs and everything. I remember getting all my clock and all the little ziggly lines and all those things going all at the same time, just thinking about all that speed, even on the 7 megahertz Amiga, and then all the custom processors around it, the calculations that were needing to be done for all of this to happen at once. It really made me understand, like, this, even that 7 megahertz with the support chips. It's like, this is actually accumulatively fast.
When the Amiga computer came out, I somehow just realized that this was a wonderful machine for making music. It had the 4 channels of 8-bit sampled audio. You could do stuff with it that was sounded at the time. That was amazing.
The game that really put Team 17 on the map was Alien Breed.
Oh, without a doubt, Alien Breed. Because I think, it's probably streets ahead of 80% of the games out there. And it took full advantage of audio, and it just played great.
Alien Breed was developed and published by Team 17. Doing both allowed them to thrive going into the mid-90s.
It just made sense. There's always a struggle. But I think being in control of publishing made sense, and remaining independent was very important to us. We just, I think we weren't brilliant at publishing, but we got better every game we released. So.
Elsewhere in 1990, 17-year-old student Andy Davidson was working away on a game. He'd been intrigued by programming from a young age.
I first got interested in programming when I was 9. My teacher at school had a VIC-20 in the classroom, and it totally captured my imagination. Just being able to make things move around on a TV screen, it seemed like magic.
His game would be an artillery game programmed on a calculator.
It was actually on a Casio FX 7500G graph plotting calculator. I was bored during A-level maths, so me and one of my friends decided to have a little competition to see who could make the best game on their calculator. It had this rudimentary programming language, and as I'd always liked artillery games, I decided to try and make one of those.
Artillery games were nothing new. Games like Scorched Earth were reasonably popular, or my personal favourite on the Amiga, Tanx, but these were visually very basic. Although there was some rather clever physics behind the scenes, artillery games were in principle very simple. Just aim your shot at an enemy and shoot.
It was just called artillery at the beginning. It was very simple compared to what would come later. The game evolved a lot over the years. The most significant change was when I decided to put worms in the game under the working title Total Wormage.
Later in 1990, development then moved from the Casio to the Amiga. Quite the leap.
The Amiga blew my mind when I first saw it. It was like it was from the future. I loved the custom chipset and its unique capabilities. It was the perfect platform to develop my game on, and it allowed me to really experiment. It was an Amiga 500 with an A590 hard drive, and later an Amiga 1200 when that was released.
All in all, development took Andy several years.
I started artillery on the Casio in 1990 when I was 17, moving it over to the Amiga in the same year. Total Wormage began in 1993. I was working at a computer shop then, which was perfect for the project as it meant customers in the shop could playtest it for me after I'd stayed up all night writing it. Overall, from the very beginning to Worms being released, it took 5 years.
In November 1993, issue 52 of Amiga Format included a copy of Blitz Basic 2 on one of its cover discs. The issue also ran a competition inviting entrants to submit a game made with Blitz Basic with the chance to win an Amiga 4000.
Amiga Format's Blitz Basic 2 competition instantly caught my attention, as I thought it'd be the perfect way of getting the game noticed. So I decided to do a complete rewrite of the game in Blitz and enter it. What appealed to me most about Blitz was its promise of being fast enough to make commercial quality games, as my mind had now turned to trying to get it published, rather than it just being a game for me and my mates to play. Getting a game published had always been my dream since those first days of playing on a VIC-20 in junior school. The cover disc was my introduction to Blitz, and I was really impressed by it. The game had been written in Amos up until then, and I took to Blitz really quick as it was another form of BASIC like Amos, and some of its features such as types where you could group variables together made things a lot easier. So I bought the full version and got started. I wouldn't say there were any major challenges developing the game in this language. It very much suited what I was trying to do, and I was in contact with Simon from Acid Software, who was really helpful.
Rewriting Worms in Blitz ended up being a stylistic turning point for Andy.
Yeah, the Amiga version has been going for 3 years at that point, but forcing myself to completely rewrite it in Blitz for the competition meant I refined it a lot, and I also came up with a lot of new ideas in the process. From deciding on worms as the protagonists to the weapons and tools I settled on, everything just seemed to click now.
The deadline for submissions was the 31st of January 1994, so entrants didn't have much time.
It was not a lot of time at all. I worked round the clock. I'm still a night owl these days, because of that I think.
When the results were published, Andy didn't get the reception he'd hoped for.
In hindsight, I probably should have included some instructions and an introduction to the game. Just dumping them into the title screen with no explanation of what the game was about probably wasn't the best first impression. I was gutted because there was no mention of the game at all in the issue that printed the results. It wasn't just the fact that it hadn't won, it didn't seem to have been noticed at all, which had been my main reason for entering. I didn't want to give up just yet though, as it had been so much work to get to that point, so that's when I came up with the idea of going up to the trade show in London to show people the game myself. Because I was working in the computer shop, I could get a ticket for it.
That trade show was 1994's ECTS, the European Computer Trade Show, held in September that year.
The game was about 80% done. Team 17 were always the company I had in mind to approach because of their support of the Amiga. The game was an Amiga game through and through in my mind, so I wanted to go with a company that respected that. I just turned up at their stand with a couple of discs in hand and just said, "Do you still look at games?" I remember while loading it up I said, "You're probably not going to like this, it's a bit weird." Martyn, however, did like it, and he said, "Do you want it published?" Pretty much straight away. I was convinced at the time that this was a wind-up and that he wasn't serious. When you've been so close to a project for so long, it's very hard to perceive what someone new to the game will think of it. It was only when I went up to Team 17's offices the following week that I realised they were serious.
And yes, you've guessed it, Worms' potential wasn't spotted by the people who saw it first.
And this is the man behind Worms, programmer Andy Davidson. Welcome to that info.
Thanks.
And he slaved away in his bedroom for more than 2 years, working with his Amiga A1200 in Blitz Basic, and came up with this, which is the original version of Worms. What's different between that and the game we're going to see released apart from the title?
Yeah, well, basically this was the first version of Worms which I got up and running. There's just a lot of things I wanted to do with the game which I didn't get time for.
This was done for a competition for Amiga Format magazine,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
I thought that basically would be the best way of getting it noticed.
They've announced the results of the competition?
Yep.
And you weren't in there?
Worms was amongst them.
So Worms is lurking in a drawer somewhere,
Yeah.
isn't it? Somewhere at Amiga Format magazine. So you knew it was a good game, but it hadn't done very well in the competition. So what did you do to get it noticed?
Well, I knocked another version together and took it along to the ECTS.
Now that's a computer trade show.
Yeah.
And you wandered around with your discs in a box.
Yeah, yeah.
And wandered. Did you go to lots of people? Or?
No, so Team 17 was the sort of top of the list because they were sort of on the side of the programmers and they've tried no different ideas before. So I went to them first and put it on, and after 5 minutes said, "Do you want it published?"
Martyn Brown recalls Andy's passion for the game.
and Andy Davidson was deeply crazy about it. So, but it was very infectious. He's telling us the worms had birthdays when they were born, and going on about it for ages. So it kind of stole the idea that it was mad and the game was good, and the game was really good. So we wanted to sign it straight away, and we initially were going to sign it and sell it on a budget label because it was fairly obviously simple graphics. But the more we played it and more we thought about it, the game offered hours and hours of play. And as you're aware, we ended up publishing it for years.
The team saw the game's infectious appeal straight away.
I do remember first seeing it. I can't remember exactly which room or exactly who showed it to me. It probably would have been Martyn Brown, who was my boss and friend at the time. And he showed me this game, and I just had to say that I agreed with everyone else. It was a great fun. It was a really nice, cool game. Quirky, humorous, and really playable.
Now that Team 17 were on board, the team could add some bells and whistles to Andy's game. Rico Holmes would supply additional graphics, Martyn Brown produced, Chris Blythe and John Allardyce would create the 3D FMV animations, and Björn Linner the music and sound effects. After starting out on the Amiga demo scene under the pseudonym Dr. Awesome, Björn moved to the UK to compose for Team 17 full time.
In the Amiga demo scene, we used to send our stuff around to people in other countries on floppy disks. And some of my stuff just made their way through to some people who were developing games. They heard my music, they heard about me. I used to have my mom's landline telephone number written in a little scroll text that would roll by under the demos. So some people from America and from Germany and from the UK would call my mum on her landline in Norway and ask to speak with Dr. Awesome. It's quite funny actually. My mother doesn't speak very much English, but she understood when somebody was asking for me. She came looking for me. Björn, there's somebody on the phone. I don't know what they're saying. It must be for you. And so I would sit there, take phone calls, and speak with the game developers from different countries, and ended up doing the music for a few games back then. This was early 90s. There was a game called Brat. I wonder if it would. Probably my first paid one. Yeah, it was Brat. I think that was my very first game that I did the music to. I did something called Fantastic Voyage, a game, American developer, Fantastic Voyage, for a German company. I don't remember exactly the names, but I did some music for some. It was like Amiga versions of some board games, puzzle games and board games. Pretty much the same process. Martyn from Team 17 called me. And I think already before he called me and asked me to move over there and work there, I had done a few little bits and pieces for them as a freelancer in the way that I described earlier. I made the music at home in Norway and sent them the Amiga files. But they needed a full-time music composer and audio guy in 95, and Martyn Brown called me. And basically wondered if I would be interested. And at the time, I had only just started another job, kind of boring stuff, with just some IT support within a big corporation here in Norway. So, and that job didn't really interest me much. So yeah, I jumped at the chance. And packed up my belongings, sold my car, sold my most of my gear, and just moved over to England, to Wakefield. I and all my friends were huge fans of Team 17. We always knew that when there was some new game coming out from Team 17, it would be cutting edge. It would be the best Amiga games. So we were already huge Team 17 software fans. And when I told my mates that I was moving over to England to start work for Team 17, they thought I was just pulling a joke. Because it sounded so unreal. But no, I had to convince them, no, really, it's true. Yeah, sure. But yeah, no, that was fantastic.
Chris was brought on to create the 3D cutscenes and intro, an addition which would likely help sell a 2D game in 1995.
I literally arrived at Team 17 and then we were off to the races. John had already started on a bunch of the stuff for the original Worms and had built the character. I mean, he said modeling wasn't his strong point. We had kind of already got it set up. We had a whole bunch of problems with like literally how little memory we had. And then we started coming up with new ideas and we storyboarded them all out and then that was that. It was really, it was Marcus Dyson, it was John Allardyce and Martyn Brown who kind of championed me to come on. And at that point then, I believe it was still called Total Wormage. And then Marcus kind of, I guess, took over the branding and the look and everything. Because I remember he came to me and said, hey, can you render me that grenade on its own? I'm like, sure, here. And then I didn't know, he showed me where it was going to kind of be and then that became the look, but the game was really in a good place. And when I started, they were pulling on a whole bunch of other people to do all the conversions, which at that point were total rewrites, I believe. There was a whole bunch of the code base that was just like, there's no way to transfer it. And the bunch that Andy Davidson had done, who I'm still in contact with, Andy Davidson had done he started that in Blitz Basic, I think, and then he did a bunch of machine code in 68000. And then, there was conversions to Game Boy, there was conversions to, there was like 15 platforms at once. I remember when you had the PC floppy and PC CD-ROM versions, they were very similar, but, the fact that those were seen as two things at the time because there were still games being delivered on floppy disk. Wow. And so I think there was 15 platforms at once. There was a lot of these people that were working off-site, and then we had a whole bunch of new people that were brought in that weren't Team 17 people that kind of brought in to do the conversions. And so I would say when I came in, it was at that moment of, it's now called Worms. So it was in a really good place.
The early to mid-90s was an experimental era for video game development, and things were no different at Team 17.
We had a lot of different games in development, and then again, it was a really young company, and so they were making a lot of mistakes because that's, of course, we were crossing, breaking new ground on a lot of different things, and a lot of it is like we're trying things and see if they stick on the wall or not, and some of them were mistakes, and some of them weren't mistakes, and some of them were cancelled that shouldn't have been cancelled and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's all par for the course, and it's easy to look at it now and go, oh, we should have done this and done that. But at the time, it was, even the fact that we were doing Worms when everyone was doing, getting into 3D, we were pushing against already. That was the way everything was going, and we were going against the grind anyway, doing 2D, but having these great 3D, animated intros. Even then, there was not many people doing animated intros to that style. I remember people kind of going, is this what we're supposed to be doing? Should we do this? And of course, now you look at it and go, yeah, of course, it makes sense now. Now a thing.
Andy continued programming the game, while Team 17 added some welcome embellishments.
I spent the next year finishing and polishing the Amiga version, while Team 17 handled the ports to other platforms. I got into a bit of trouble for still adding extra things into the game during this time, such as the exploding sheep, banana bomb, and custom levels.
I mean, to be honest, the Amiga version was practically finished. We started working with Andy on follow-ups pretty early on, and getting him to stop working on the Amiga version was a job in itself, because he'd never believed it was actually finished and still wanted to keep working on it. We just want to finish the game, you know. If he was up to Andy, he'd been still working on it until yesterday. So, and the more we played it, we thought of other ideas and tweaks and stuff. So we had to be very conscious of what actually would get in the game, and a lot of stuff was saved for other sequels, basically products down the line.
I did all the animations and all the original background graphics. I used Deluxe Paint on the Amiga and later Brilliance. After showing it to Team 17, their artists redid the background graphics, as there were people there who were much more talented than me for that. The new background graphics by Rico and the music by Bjorn added some extra polish to the game, which I was very happy with. Also, Martyn's idea of the sarcastic prod move was a very good fit.
The gameplay of Worms was inspired by artillery games, but its visual style was anything but. Many of the game's stylistic choices had been decided upon by Andy years prior, particularly its look and sense of humour.
I'd been very impressed by Lemmings and the amount of character they got into the Lemmings despite them being so small. I needed small characters because of the game being 4 players with 4 worms each. As for how the game looked, I'd always loved parallax effects ever since Potty Pigeon on the C64, so I wanted a game to feature that and be a mix of realistic and cartoony. In 1993, worms were just about the only animal that hadn't been in a game. This was before any had been called Jim. I also thought they were a natural fit because of them living underground, and that I'd be able to get a lot of character into the animations because of their shape.
The random landscapes were an integral aspect of the game's longevity.
Randomly generated landscapes had always fascinated me, and this was a feature since the very first version of the game on the Casio. I saw random landscapes as a key to making it interesting to play. As the game was originally just for me and my friends to play instead of doing schoolwork, I wanted to create something that wouldn't get boring, that wouldn't repeat itself. Random landscapes were a big part of that.
The randomly generated landscapes also meshed perfectly with the weapons and tools available, opening up myriad strategies.
Procedural, so it plays differently every time. The placing of the worms is different. So every game was different, different experience, and strange physics, which it made the worms that fall in different places and blow up differently, and just do unexpected things. And it made the game was genuinely funny. Outrageous deaths and stuff, and it always managed to create some mad scenario, which it was almost unbelievable. And it's something we played on in later versions. We did a lot more of the culminating physics stuff that you just can't write. So as long as it made for more funny scenarios, all the better.
I think the fact that each time you play it is totally different is why the game has endured. Just the variety of different tactics that you can employ. While making it, it sort of became a challenge to myself to see how deep I could make the game, how many different strategies I could implement, and how that would all fit together. I'd always loved artillery games, going way back to the 8-bit days, but it was introducing movement and directly controllable characters that really opened the game up and allowed for much more depth. Depth is the key to a game having lasting appeal for me. The weapon and tool set evolved over time, as I encountered situations where I thought something would be useful, so I thought about solutions I could put into the game. The shotgun is a good example of that, enabling you to take out 2 worms with low energy in 1 turn. Pretty much everything went into the game in the end. As it was evolving on screen and through people playing it instead of creating a design document first, things tended to slot right in rather than being thought of and then cut when they didn't work in practice.
To Andy, the comedic aspect of the game was of paramount importance.
Yeah, the comedy aspect was very important to me. I wanted to try and create a game that would have a lot of depth, but one that also didn't take itself too seriously. I wanted people to be able to find enjoyment in the game, even if they weren't playing it correctly or couldn't get the hang of it. The humour emphasises the social aspect of the game, which I think is very important for a multiplayer game.
One of Team 17's main contributions to Worms was arguably the music, composed by Ylinen. A subtle background style was decided upon.
I think we just sat down and talked about it, and we kind of agreed that we needed one memorable sort of main theme, and we needed some not too obtrusive background music for in-game play. And we just went with that. So I think we agreed that I should make one like proper tune that was memorable and catchy, and then I should make a bunch of ambient music suitable for the different types of landscapes. Like we had hell, space, mechanical stuff. There was different graphics packages and music for each of those, and we just kind of agreed that that music should be quite ambient, low-key, stay in the background, not be too much in your face, because people would just switch it off, right?
Björn had some gear he'd brought with him from Norway when moving to Wakefield to join Team 17.
I brought some stuff over with me from Norway, and I should add that even before I moved to England, I was also making some music that wasn't just the Amiga. I had my setup with keyboards and a few rack mount synth units and a mixing desk and things like that. I was also making my own music just for myself, just to release on albums and tapes and stuff. That wasn't really directly connected to games or Amiga, but I was into electronic music, ambient music and things like that already before '95. So I had some synth gear that I took with me, including a master keyboard that I would play on. So when I set up at the Team 17 office, I started with my own gear, and then bit by bit, I asked the Team 17 management, Martyn Brown, and I forgot the name of the other guys in the management back then, but I bit by bit I started asking them for a little bit of money to buy some gear, and I had to make my arguments for why I needed this and that. And they were good. They were good to me. If I could reasonably argue why I needed a piece of gear, they would fork out the cash to buy it. So I had my own. It was like kind of a large office in the corner of a building over at Team 17. I had plenty of space for setting up gear and stuff. That was great.
This ambient background style was new ground for Björn.
This was my first outing in that direction, I have to say. I think before that, my goal with the music was always to make the music as interesting as possible. Always give the listener something to notice and catch and maybe be a little surprised by or something like that. So this is my first outing into that kind of music that's just there to provide an atmosphere, but without really being noticed.
Björn also added the sound effects for the game.
I made the sound effects. I got permission from management to buy a huge compact disc-based library of sound effects with like 100 CDs or something, and a booklet like this with this like an alphabetical listing of keywords and stuff. So I would literally look up sound effects on paper and then find them on the correct disc, find the correct track, and even each track would have like maybe 20 or 30 sounds. With sound number 18 on track number 74 on the disc number 28. There I would find the sound, and I would mix and match a little bit, blend them a little bit, edit them, maybe use the attack part from one sound and the tail from a different sound, pitch, change them a little bit, and do things like that. I would do that. Yeah, but we together I put some sounds into the game. We tried and tested it a bit. Sometimes the sound would sort of come out a little bit different than I had imagined when you actually played the game. I would go back and change it a little bit, and then update a little bit for the next version.
He not only added the sound effects, but another aspect of the audio that has become synonymous with worms: the voices of the worms themselves.
It's very, very simple, very straightforward. They were recorded in my corner office in Team 17 with my just microphone that we had there. Just a regular professional microphone, if I remember correctly. It was an AKG C1000 condenser microphone that we had. So a good microphone, but again, the actual technical sound quality wasn't the key. The key was the delivery, right? And the timing. And Andy Davidson, who was the creator of the game, he was in my corner office, and we talked about a little bit about the voices, because he had already experimented at home with using his own voice in a kind of falsetto, watch this, kind of sound, and he would speed up that. So he already kind of had a little recipe for what would work for that. And of course he was right. So that was a great approach. Very simple, not complicated. In order to make it sound like correct speed after it was pitched up, we would just speak slowly. So rather than saying, watch this, we would say, watch this. And then you speed that up by five semitones. You get something that's higher pitched and then the correct length, right? That's how we did it.
Voicing the various themed Worms teams would be a collaborative effort.
It was Andy Davidson himself, the original game creator. He delivered the voices for the default Worms voice set.
Leave me alone.
And together with him, Martyn, and Chris Blythe, who I think you already spoke with, and the various other people at the Team 17 office, we just talked about it, and so different people had a few different ideas of fun sound sets that we could do, and we would pitch up everything, right? So it was Chris voiced something he called the Angry Scott.
A team effort. We didn't use voice artists for the first set. They came later on. We occasionally did voice artist stuff where it made sense, but we were just having a laugh. It was, I did Yorkshire Bank. It was a lot of fun, and Chris did Scottish Bank, and I don't know, I think it would do about 6 or 7. I don't know, quite a few different voice packs back then.
I was asked to then do some of the voices. So, everyone did everything. It was amazing back then, is that, we were allowed to kind of do we were allowed to kind of do a lot there was no one would stop you. In fact, that it was Bjorn Lind they would say, hey, you can you do different voices? Can you do this? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And we just went in and did it. And then it became, hey, we've got all these extra voices now. And now it's really funny if you look at all the different packs that are on there. Like Soul Man was one of the ones I did. I did Angry Scots, of course.
Get on up. I'm as steady as a rock.
Soul Man was one, and it's kind of still got a lot of the same things in there that I did way back then. But I was quite surprised that they used my voice for so many versions after that. But yeah, you got to do a lot of different things.
Yeah, we had various different characters, and my girlfriend at the time, who is also Norwegian, she's called Hannah. She's my wife now and has been ever since. She had a funny thing that she could do a pretty good Arnold Schwarzenegger thing. So she voiced a sound set for the Arnold Schwarzenegger And that's, I don't know if it's still out there. It must be still. Everything is still out there somewhere. Yeah, it was fun. When it came to the later versions of Worms, we were kind of constantly on the lookout for people who could do certain characters in a funny way. Somebody knew somebody who who did a great Elvis or something. Yeah, just ideas like that came up, and yeah, let's go for it. Let's do it. And we recorded everything at my place, and I had the same process with everything. I named the files such and such. I pitched them up such and such. Recorded in the same way. So yeah, it's good fun.
Team 17 struck a deal with seasoned Amiga publisher Ocean to publish Worms. They had experience not only with the Amiga, but crucially with multi-format releases.
We did a deal with Ocean. Ocean signed Worms and about 7 or 8 other games, which we went to work on over 3 years. Sorry, that was a different time for us. I mean, Worms just went ballistic, and sold on 9 or 10 different platforms, and sold a lot as well. Had proper marketing. It was a very, very special time. It was very difficult because we'd not done any platforms other than Amiga. And I think we did it on 9 platforms, so we had to convert it to everything else beforehand. Yeah, and also Mega Drive and stuff like this, and Nintendo format, Game Boy, and it's all a bit of work in the dark, really. So let's get moving and rely on Ocean. I mean, Ocean, looking back, were really good, but they were northern based, so we got on famously well.
Yeah, there were a lot of different platforms at that time, and they each had their own sound chips, right? And each had their own challenges. So yes, I do remember having to kind of port or even recreate the music in different formats. I think I had to do a MIDI version, general MIDI version. I had to do a mod version.
Some platforms were a struggle to secure as 2D games weren't in favour in 1995, particularly the PlayStation in North America.
Yes, friends, I'm talking about this.
Coming from Amiga, I mean, we hadn't got an enormous catalogue of 3D games. I mean, Sony were really, really keen to do 3D games, and there wasn't much interest in doing 2D games. It's quite a struggle just to get Worms approved. Even though we were, believing in the game design being right up there, the fact that it was 2D held it back. But because it wasn't visually stunning, it found few friends. But it did sell well on PlayStation.
In the end, Worms was released on Amiga in November 1995. This was quite a late release for the Amiga and proved that it still had some life in it yet. Ports soon followed for DOS, Mac, the Amiga CD32, Game Boy, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, PlayStation, Sega Saturn and Atari Jaguar. Ports for Nintendo's Virtual Boy and Sega's 32X add-on were also planned, but were subsequently cancelled. In addition to this great number of conversions, Worms also received an updated version in 1997, the Director's Cut, released only on Amiga. This added loads of customization, visual upgrades, improved parallax scrolling, and a ton of cool new weapons, many of which have become series staples.
After Worms came out, I started work immediately on an updated Amiga version. This started out as just an AGA upgrade to make the game look as good as it could on the Amiga, but it soon turned into much more than that with the addition of new weapons and gameplay features. Worms 2 was in development at the same time, and I wanted to make sure that it was a satisfying sequel, so I used this opportunity to prototype everything on the Amiga. This was when I put things like Super Sheep, the Holy Hand Grenade and the Concrete Donkey into the game. Team 17 gave me complete creative freedom to do what I wanted with the game, which was really appreciated, and it turned into a real labour of love. Worms the Director's Cut would be the template for Worms 2, Armageddon, and the games that followed.
One consequence of porting Worms from Amiga to CD-based formats was that they had a lot of extra space on the discs. Team 17 decided to utilise this space by adding 3D FMV cutscenes and intros. Chris was brought in for this very purpose.
You know, we've got about 95% of the disc free. You know, spoke with Chris and just left it up to him. Knowing Chris, it was just a case of leaving it to Chris and doing a good job. It was only what's called beer mat concepts of what they wanted to do, and because we were so busy doing everything else, I was so happy that they did the stuff and he just delivered it, and it was great.
I mean, I was brought in to really work on the cinematic intros, and we had other ones that we had that were really good fun as well that we never got to do. We had way more ideas than we had time for, and but then we ended up doing all the sound effects and then editing all that together. And doing all the editing back then, man, was not easy. Even having the systems to do on the box editing was like a deal.
Chris would use an Amiga to create the animations made with Lightwave 3D. This software was revolutionary for home video editing. When combined with the video toaster, it allowed people to create amazing 3D animations on their Amiga in their own home. Creating the animations in Lightwave on his Amiga 4000, Chris would send the data to another separate specialised machine for rendering.
We had this thing called it was going to be called the Screamer, which was going to be a new tech developed NT box with two NT workstations in the box that would communicate with each other and a network card and everything. And then it turned into this thing called the Raptor. I think the Raptor was made by someone else, and it was, again, a big, large, expensive box. And I think we got the second one in the country. I think Andy Bishop from AMG had the first one. And it was basically two boards with two processors, two 6800 ARM processors or something, MIPS processors. Can't remember. And it was two motherboards were in there, each with two chips on them, and would basically send renders to it from the Amiga. It had no keyboard, it had no monitor. You basically, in Lightwave, you go to the networking panel and you click the button and it would not appear. You click it again and one would appear. You'd wait, you click it again, you look at it, and you have a cup of coffee, and you click it, and then doom, all four would appear, or 12 little instances would appear, like, it's talking to it. And then we'd load up a scene and then send the scene to it, and like downloading, and then it would render so fast, it was bananas. So that's how we got all our renders done. If it wasn't for that Raptor, we'd be screwed. And I remember when John was really pushing for that Raptor to be boxed, like a hard push. And if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have done it. We wouldn't have been able to get anything done. So that was a pioneering spirit from John that really pushed that forward. And I kind of arrived, it was already there. I didn't do any of that. That was all John.
Despite the cutting-edge hardware, they still faced severe memory limitations.
What it would allow us to do is try things and try things out. We'd do some animation and you'd see it on the Amiga, but you could try things out, but because the rendering and the software that you'd run to allow it to talk to the Raptor would take a 1.5 megabytes, your amount of memory that you had to render on and then send to that machine, we found the exact number of the exact bytes that you could send before it would crash. And what would happen, it would come back with things missing from the scene. You would literally have eyeballs missing. And it was like, shit, we're like a kilobyte over. We're like, okay, hang on. If I decimate these eyeballs and I remove the back polygons and I do this, and it was like, we're under, it's working. It was like, it reminded me of Apollo 13 when they were trying to restart it with using less amps and doing all this stuff. It was basically like that. Like we got it under that level, that meter, the amperage level of like, oh, we're just under. Okay, we're good. And then we wrote down that number on a piece of paper and stuck it onto the machine, I think, or something, you know. And it was like, as long as your scene before you sent it was under that number, you knew to render. My Amiga was I really felt like there was times it was like wanting to crash, and it was holding on. I was like, please just hold on for just a bit longer. And I literally felt like it was going to crash, and it was really going slow. And it was like, I could feel it going, I got you. I'll hold on for a bit longer, and then I get something done. And our thing was save and save often. So it was amazing. And having that machine allowed us to, you'd see it in wireframe, but sometimes, and this is what was cool, is that even on the Amiga 4000 that we're on, it was sometimes quicker to send it and render it than wait for it to be wireframed and come back. So that's the kind of freedom, and it's filled in, even though you could put it to low resolution. So that's what we do low resolution. We just put it to like a lower res in the thing, and then send it off, and then it would come back, and then you play it on the perception card, and it was just magic. That whole setup was just amazing.
In the end, they created several animated cutscenes, most based on the various weapons available in the game. Chris and John would brainstorm ideas for these cutscenes, sometimes drawing storyboards.
So John Allardyce had a lot of these ideas kind of like laid out, and so basically I was brought in to help him to finish, not to finish, but to really, he'd done a couple all the way through, and there was another couple that had still got stuff, and then there was other ones that had no ideas. We just started writing down titles. Kamikaze. Oh yeah, you do that. Okay, this. All right, but they weren't mapped out at all. And then, we did take the time to kind of draw them out, and then propose some of them. We had this one called, we did one that was like Doom, was basically the worm's arms of the Uzis going. We animate the whole thing. We rendered the whole thing, and we made everything else. The other ones look like Doom, and we rendered the whole walls, everything. It was done, and it's still out there actually. Then we contacted ID or ID or whoever they're called, and they were McCormick, who was like, nope. I think there's still an E for that. It's like, nope, we don't feel that. And I'm like, damn, because it was funny. But as it turned out, we just came up with other ones.
The cutscenes managed to capture the humour of Andy's game very well and complemented it perfectly.
I absolutely loved Chris's cutscenes. It all added to the game and to its humour.
It goes without saying that Worms was an absolute smash hit. Worms was a huge hit not only on Amiga, on which it was a relatively late release, but on many platforms.
Worms, the computer game.
The game sort of suited the hardware, and everything just sort of worked. And I think as well, Amiga on the A1200 was probably the big game. Worms just went ballistic. Sold on 9 or 10 different platforms, and it sold a lot as well. Had proper marketing. It was a very, very special time.
Regarded as one of the all-time greatest local multiplayer games, Worms also saw success with online multiplayer.
Oh yeah, we had eight players at that time playing online. Playing like people in Brazil. You could play in turns real time. It was probably the first, that really played like that. It was technically doing something really, really clever.
One of the cool things they did at Team 17 though was when the LAN versions of Worms came out and the pirate versions were out there, it was Martyn's idea. When if you got pirated software, people say, oh, this is out, and you load it up and say, hey, brought to you by so-and-so, right? The first one would win, whoever gets it out first. So now I'd have to really go check with Martyn on this one, but Team 17 put out their own copy, their own hacked version, so that they could monitor the cracked versions. So when they, on the LAN version, it would come with a little pirate flag of who was a pirated software, and you could kick them off. So we were the ones that put the software out, because you got people that are going to buy the software, and you got people that are going to pirate it. Doesn't matter, you know. And so that was the way of keeping an eye on things.
Despite the extra flair added by Team 17, the majority of the game was developed by one person, Andy Davidson, which is a source of great pride for him.
Yes, it is. Looking back, I'm not sure how I even managed it. I just sort of got into this zone where I lived and breathed the game, and seeing people's reactions to it as I was developing it just fueled this creative process, which was immensely satisfying.
Being released late in the Amiga's life, Worms was released in a magical time for gaming in the 90s, an era which the team remember very fondly.
As we're older, I think now we're realizing it's not something to be, oh, Amiga, it's my old day. Like, no, it's absolutely celebrated. It was a magical time that is now becoming just as magical. And for a lot of people that I know, for using Lightwave, you know, they owe their careers to using their Amiga. This was the early 90s. Good God, we had it good and we didn't know it, you know? There was much more thought back then was put into the software that works, and also getting a solid product out before you get it out the door. And that was for us in the game. We couldn't do an over-the-air update on Worms. You had to get it right.
Regardless of their passion for Worms, nobody saw it being a game that would still be talked about and played almost 30 years later. Its legacy is more enduring than most.
We really believed in the games that we were making, but we didn't think people were still playing them 30 or 40 years later and talking them with such warm memories. I mean, the amount of people who played Worms through the university years, and you know, and got tattoos and stuff of the team members. You know, it's unbelievable, really. And the game really caught people's imagination. And I remember in the early days, we heard people playing Worms, as in playing the game in real life. Kids in the garden, you know, so pretending to throw grenades and stuff. So for us, it was something else.
I do have my personal YouTube channel, and on that channel I just put up all the Worms music tracks with just like a still picture of the game cover. And there's a lot of comments on there. There's a lot of comments from people just wanting to say thanks, or I found this old music. I can't believe I haven't heard this for 30 years, and now it's so great to hear it again. And a lot of those people writing those comments on those videos, I think we're too young to be on social media, or to be on the internet even, or even to send a note to somebody or anything like that. But now they're 35 or 40 years old, right? And they finally able to express kind of gratitude, or just finding other people who remember those old games.
It was my dream just to get a game published and to see it on a shelf in a shop. I would have been happy with just that, but to see the game get as big as it did, it was amazing. Especially as, in my head, it's still the little game I made for me and my mates. I'm just glad that so many people found the same enjoyment from the game as we did. It still blows my mind. I never dreamed that I'd be here nearly 30 years later doing an interview about it, or that people would still be having weekly tournaments of my game, even now. I'm so happy that people enjoy the game as much as I enjoyed making it. Keep on worming.
Keep on worming indeed. Thank you very much for watching.
What's this?